My family disowned me over a lie. Later they begged me to return, but I did a revenge. Hello, read it. There are moments in life that don't just change everything. They erase the person you used to be. One day, you wake up believing in family, in loyalty, in the idea that if you're a good person, life will be fair. And then, without warning, that belief is ripped away from you, leaving behind something hollow, something you'll never be able to replace. 7 years ago, I lost everything in a single instant. My home, my future, my family, the people who raised me, the people I had spent my life trying to make proud, turned their backs on me without hesitation. And the worst part? I didn't even know why at first. My name is Ryan Calloway. I'm 27 now, but back then, I was 20, just another college student trying to keep up with the demands of school, work, and life. I had never been the reckless type. I wasn't the kind of guy who made stupid mistakes. I was responsible, disciplined, the kind of son my parents could hold up as an example. They had always expected a lot from me, and I had never given them a reason to be disappointed. I had spent years following their rules, meeting their expectations, doing everything right. None of it mattered in the end. It started with whispers. I didn't notice at first, just little things, moments that should have meant nothing. Friends taking longer to reply to texts. People at school giving me strange looks. Conversations ending abruptly when I entered a room. But then, the silence became impossible to ignore. People I had known for years stopped talking to me entirely. Some of them wouldn't even look at me. My name became something that people muttered under their breath, something that carried weight that I didn't understand. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it, that maybe I had done something without realizing it. But then, the distance became a wall. Friends who had once been inseparable from me vanished overnight. People I had known since childhood acted like I didn't exist. And when I finally gathered the nerve to ask what was going on, I got the same vague, dismissive response. You know what you did? I didn't. But by the time I realized how deep it went, it was already too late. My parents called me home one evening, their voices cold and unreadable. It wasn't unusual for them to summon me for lectures about school or responsibilities, so I wasn't immediately worried. But the second I stepped into the house, I felt it. The shift, the weight in the air. My mother's face was pale, my father's expression carved from stone. The living room, once filled with warmth, felt like a courtroom where I had already been found guilty. I barely got a word out before my father told me that I had brought shame to the family, that they could barely stand to look at me. My mother said she didn't even recognize the son she had raised. I was a disgrace, an embarrassment, a stain on their name. I asked them what they were talking about. They refused to explain. They didn't need to. They already knew everything. The betrayal hit me harder than anything else. Not the strangers whispering behind my back. Not the friends who had abandoned me. The way my parents looked at me with such certainty, as if my defense didn't even matter. They had already made their decision. They had already chosen to erase me. I denied it, whatever it was. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about, that whatever they had heard wasn't true. But my words meant nothing. My father told me to pack my things and leave. My mother turned away, refusing to look at me. They didn't want explanations. They wanted me gone. I left that night with nothing but a duffel bag and the growing, gnawing realization that my life was over. I tried to fight back. I tried to find out what was being said about me, who had started it, why it was spreading like wildfire. But every door I knocked on was slammed in my face. Every friend I reached out to had already heard the story, and none of them wanted to be caught in the fallout. Nick was my last hope. He had been my best friend since childhood, the one person I thought would never turn against me. If anyone could tell me what was going on, it was him. But when I finally confronted him, when I saw the hesitation in his eyes, I knew. He already knew the rumors. He had already heard the story, and he didn't know if he believed me. I saw the war in his expression, the doubt creeping in. He wanted to trust me, but something held him back. He told me he needed time, that maybe things would calm down, that maybe my parents would listen eventually. Eventually never came. I lost everything. My home, my education. Without my parents' support, I couldn't afford tuition. I dropped out of college. My reputation followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I applied for jobs, only to be met with awkward silences and polite rejections. People knew my name, and no one wanted to take a chance on someone with a past like mine. So I left. I moved to a city where no one had already decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. I took whatever work I could find, barely scraping by, rebuilding myself from nothing. The anger faded over time, replaced by something worse. Apathy. I stopped thinking about what had happened. Stopped caring. My past became something distant, something that no longer belonged to me. Until 2 weeks ago. My phone rang late at night. A number I didn't recognize. A voice I hadn't heard in 7 years. Nick? He sounded different, hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to start. He said he needed to talk to me, that it was about what had happened years ago. I almost hung up, almost told him I didn't care, that it was too late, that I had moved on. But then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. The truth had finally come out. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to, because deep down, I had always known that one day, the lie that had destroyed me would fall apart. And now, the people who had abandoned me were about to realize exactly what they had done. For 7 years, I forced myself not to think about it. I convinced myself that it didn't matter anymore, that the past was dead, that nothing could change what had happened. I had spent years building a new life, one where my name wasn't whispered behind my back, where I wasn't a cautionary tale or a disgrace. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. And when I picked up that phone, when I heard Nick's voice after all these years, I realized that no matter how far I had run, I had never really escaped. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept pulling me back to that time in my life, to the slow unraveling of everything I had once known. The details were still vivid, sharp, burned into my memory like a wound that had never fully healed. I had been so blind, so unaware of what was creeping up behind me. I remembered the first signs of something being wrong, how small they had seemed at the time. People hesitating before they spoke to me. Friends who had once been close suddenly keeping their distance. Professors looking at me differently, as if something had tainted my reputation before I even knew what was happening. I had written it off as stress, as bad luck, as something that would pass. I hadn't realized that the ground beneath me had already started to crack. And then one day, it wasn't subtle anymore. I walked into campus and felt it immediately, the suffocating silence, the eyes that lingered too long, the way conversation stopped the moment I was near. It was the kind of attention that made your skin crawl, the kind that told you you weren't welcome anymore. At first, I thought I had done something without realizing it. Maybe I had pissed off the wrong person. Maybe I had said something that had been taken the wrong way. But there was no confrontation, no argument, no moment where I could look back and say, this is where it all went wrong. Instead, it was like a disease spreading through every part of my life, infecting my friendships, my reputation, my very existence. I tried asking people directly. The first few times, I was met with awkward silences, vague responses, and pitying glances. The way they spoke to me, like they already knew something I didn't, made my stomach twist. Then someone finally said it. Maybe you should talk to your parents. That was when I realized that whatever was happening to me wasn't just rumors on campus. It had already reached my home. I can still remember every detail of the night. I lost everything. The way my mother's face was pale and tight, her hands clenched in a fist at her sides. The way my father stood stiffly, his expression carved from stone, as if I was someone he didn't recognize anymore. I had barely made it through the door before they told me I had shamed them, that they were disgusted by me, that I had ruined my own life and, worse, theirs. I asked them what they were talking about. They refused to tell me. That was the worst part of it all. They didn't even tell me what I had done. They had already made their decision, already passed their judgment, already decided that I wasn't their son anymore. I stood there, stunned, trying to explain that I didn't even know what they were talking about, but they wouldn't hear it. They told me they had already heard enough, that there was proof, that they believed the story. I begged them to listen to me, to tell me what was happening, to tell me who had said what. But my mother just shook her head, and my father told me to pack my things and leave. And just like that, I was erased. I remember standing outside the house, my bag in my hand, my entire life gone in an instant. The lights were still on inside, but to them, I didn't exist anymore. The home I had grown up in, the people I had spent my life trying to make proud, had discarded me without a second thought. I told myself that I would figure out the truth, that I would find out what had been said, who had started it, why it had spread so fast. But every door I knocked on was slammed shut. My friends, people I had trusted, wouldn't even look at me. The few who spoke to me only said the same thing. I don't want to get involved. Nick was my last hope. He had been my best friend since childhood, the one person I thought would always stand by me. If anyone knew what was happening, it was him. I found him sitting alone on the bleachers behind campus, staring at his phone like he was waiting for a message he didn't want to receive. When he saw me, something in his face shifted. Guilt. I asked him if he knew what people were saying about me. He hesitated. That was the moment I knew that he already knew everything. I kept pressing, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He said it was complicated, that he wasn't sure what to believe, that there were things he couldn't ignore. I asked him what those things were. He wouldn't say. He told me he needed time, that maybe things would calm down, that maybe my parents would listen eventually. Eventually never came. Nick didn't call me again. He didn't check on me after I dropped out of school, after I left town. I was dead to him, just like I was dead to everyone else. And now, 7 years later, he was calling me out of nowhere, acting like he suddenly cared. Like after all this time, I was supposed to just pick up the pieces of a life that had been stolen from me and pretend none of it had ever happened. The past had been buried for 7 years, and I had convinced myself that I didn't need to dig it back up. But when I heard Nick's voice over the phone, I felt it, the slow burn of something I had spent years suppressing. He told me the truth had finally come out, that everything that had been said about me had been a lie. But he didn't tell me what the lie was. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him that I didn't care, that it didn't matter anymore. But that was a lie. It did matter. It had always mattered. For 7 years, I had been the villain in a story I didn't even know the plot of. And now, after all this time, I was finally going to find out who had destroyed my life and why. But if they thought they could come crawling back now, begging for forgiveness, pretending like none of it had ever happened, they were about to learn exactly what it felt like to be left behind. For 7 years, I carried a question that had no answer. 7 years of playing back every moment before my life fell apart, searching for the mistake I must have made, the moment I had unknowingly doomed myself. I had spent nights lying awake, retracing conversations, interactions, trying to understand why everything I had built had been wiped away in an instant. But there was never a moment, never a mistake, just the sudden, brutal realization that no one had ever wanted to hear my side of the story, that the people who should have defended me, who should have known me better than anyone, had thrown me away without hesitation. And now, just like that, Nick was handing me the answer over the phone. It was Emma. I didn't react at first. My grip on the phone tightened, my breath slowed, but inside, all I felt was a vast, hollow silence stretching out in my chest. It was like my body was waiting for the impact, for the truth to actually sink in. I had spent years imagining different scenarios, different explanations, but somehow I had never considered this. Emma Barnes, Nick's younger sister, 17 at the time, a girl I had barely spoken to outside of polite conversation, someone who had been nothing more than a background presence in my life. And yet, she had been the one to destroy everything. Nick's voice was filled with guilt as he explained. Emma had fabricated everything. A story so twisted and convincing that no one had even thought to question it. She had painted herself as the victim, crying to their parents, my parents, their entire circle of influence, telling them that I had betrayed her, taken advantage of her, that I had ruined her life and walked away without remorse. I felt my pulse hammering in my skull as Nick kept talking, detailing how she had built her lie with evidence. Fake text messages, altered screenshots, a carefully crafted timeline that made it impossible for anyone to doubt her. She had given just enough details to make it seem real, just enough emotion to make people furious on her behalf, just enough malice to turn me into a monster overnight. But that wasn't the worst part. She had done it to protect someone else. I sat up straighter, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath came slow and sharp as Nick hesitated before saying it. Emma had been seeing someone older, someone she wasn't supposed to be with. And when the truth threatened to come out, when she realized the consequences she would face, she had made a choice. She needed a scapegoat, someone close enough for it to be believable, someone who had no way to defend himself, someone who wouldn't see the lie coming until it was too late. She had chosen me. I listened in stunned silence as Nick unraveled the full extent of what had happened. His parents had believed Emma without a second thought. My parents had too. No hesitation. No questions. No doubt. They hadn't even spoken to me before deciding I was guilty. Because why would Emma lie? Why would a crying teenage girl make up something so horrific? Why would she ruin someone's life if it wasn't true? I swallowed hard, feeling something dark coil in my stomach. Because she had known she could. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had known that her parents would protect her, that my parents would rather throw me away than deal with the shame of being associated with something like this. She had known that once the words left her mouth, there would be no coming back from it. And she had been right. Nick kept talking, his voice thick with guilt as he explained how, over the years, Emma had started making mistakes. She had gotten careless. She had made comments that contradicted her original story, slipped up in ways that didn't align with the carefully crafted lie she had once told so flawlessly. At first, no one wanted to believe it. No one wanted to admit they had been wrong, that they had condemned an innocent person without a shred of real proof. But then someone started digging, and they found proof. Real proof. My breathing slowed, my entire body tensing as Nick's voice dropped lower, like saying it too loudly would make it worse. Emma had been caught, and she had confessed, not because she felt guilty, not because she wanted to make things right, but because she had no choice. I felt something cold settle inside me as Nick explained that Emma had admitted it had all been a lie, that she had fabricated the entire story because she had been scared. Scared of the consequences of her own actions. Scared. The word burned through me like acid. She had been scared, so she had ruined me. For 7 years, I had lived in exile, my name dragged through the dirt, my family turning their backs on me, all because she had been afraid of taking responsibility for herself. I had lost everything, my education, my future, my friends, because she had been too much of a coward to admit the truth. And now my parents wanted to talk. Nick told me they were begging to see me, that they had been trying to find me, desperate to apologize, to make things right, that they were devastated, ashamed, broken by what they had done, that they wanted their son back. I sat there, listening to his words, feeling nothing but a slow, burning rage. They wanted to talk now? Where had that been when I had begged them to listen? Where had that been when they had thrown me out of their house without giving me a chance to speak? Where had that been when I had spent nights sleeping in my car, when I had lost my education, my future, my entire life? They had made their choice. They had chosen to believe Emma without a second thought. They had chosen to throw me away. And now that the truth had come out, now that they had realized what they had done, they expected me to come back? I exhaled slowly, gripping my knee to stop my hands from shaking. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something colder, a sharp, cutting realization that I wasn't the same person they had abandoned. Nick kept talking, saying he understood if I didn't want to see them, that he just thought I should know, that he regretted not standing by me, that he wished he had done more. I barely heard him, because my mind was already somewhere else. They had taken everything from me, and now they were going to understand exactly what that felt like. Ryan had thought that nothing could surprise him anymore. He had believed that after 7 years of suffering, after losing everything, after clawing his way back from the ruins of a life stolen from him, there was nothing left that could truly shake him. But he had been wrong. Learning that Emma had been the one behind it all had been a cruel revelation. But learning that she had done it to protect someone else had been worse. And now, as Nick revealed the final, horrifying truth, Ryan felt something inside him snap. The man Emma had been protecting wasn't some nameless stranger. He wasn't just an older man with something to lose. He was someone Ryan had known his entire life. Someone his family had respected, had trusted, had welcomed into their home. The man Emma had been involved with was his father's best friend. The betrayal settled like a stone in his chest. This wasn't just about Emma's lies anymore. This was something deeper, something uglier. This was the realization that Ryan had been thrown away like garbage while the real guilty party had been shielded, protected, given the freedom to keep living his life while Ryan had been left to rot. The weight of it pressed down on him as Nick continued talking, filling in the details Ryan hadn't known. Emma had been involved with the man for over a year before everything unraveled. At first, it had been a secret only she and the man shared, something reckless and dangerous that she had kept hidden. But eventually, she had started to use it. She had turned it into leverage, a weapon she could wield against him whenever she wanted something. He had given her money, gifts, helped her cover things up when she got into trouble. But at some point, he had had enough. He had tried to cut her off. That had been her breaking point. She had panicked, realized that without his protection, she would have to face the consequences of everything she had done. And so, she had made a decision. If she couldn't keep him silent, she would bury the truth beneath a bigger lie. And Ryan had been the perfect target. He had been at their house often. He had been trusted, respected, close enough to make the accusations seem plausible. And most importantly, he had been disposable. The moment she had accused him, no one had hesitated. No one had stopped to think, to question, to give him the benefit of the doubt. He had been thrown to the wolves before he even had the chance to defend himself. And now, after all this time, the only reason the truth had come out was because Emma's leverage had finally collapsed. The man she had protected for so long had turned on her. He had realized that if he didn't speak first, she would eventually drag him down with her. And so, he had done the only thing he could. He had exposed her before she could expose him. He had provided real evidence, real messages, real transactions that proved Emma had been lying from the very beginning. Ryan felt the slow, burning rage creeping into his veins. His parents had protected this man. Without even realizing it, they had welcomed him into their home while abandoning their own son. They had chosen to believe the lie because it was easier than facing the truth. And now, after years of ignoring what they had done, they wanted to fix it. Nick had barely finished explaining when Ryan made his decision. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He wasn't going to let them feel the relief of thinking they could apologize and make everything better. They had made their choice. Now, he was going to make his. His parents had been trying to reach him for weeks. They had been begging to talk, desperate to explain, to convince themselves that they could still undo the damage they had done. But Ryan wasn't interested in apologies. He wanted them to feel it, the weight of being unwanted, unheard, erased. And so he finally called them back. His mother picked up immediately. He could almost picture the shock, the relief, the frantic hope that maybe, just maybe, her son would forgive them. He let her speak, let her pour out the excuses, the regret, the desperate attempts to rewrite history. She talked about how much they had missed him, how they had believed they were doing the right thing, how they had never stopped loving him. And then Ryan asked the only question that mattered. Had they ever doubted Emma's story? Had they even once stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, their son was innocent? There was a long silence. And then the answer came. No, they had never doubted her. Not once. And that was all Ryan needed to hear. They had never believed in him. They had never wanted to hear his side. They had discarded him without hesitation, had rewritten him as a villain in their minds because it was easier than admitting they had made a mistake. They had let him suffer, let him lose everything, because keeping the lie intact had been more convenient than facing the truth. And now that the lie had collapsed, they wanted to bring him back. They wanted to heal their family. They wanted to pretend the past could be erased. But Ryan wasn't interested in being their son anymore. He was coming back, but not for forgiveness. He was coming back to make them understand exactly what they had done. The drive back felt longer than it should have. 7 years had passed. And yet, as Ryan approached the town that had once been his home, time seemed to shrink, dragging him back into a past he had spent so long trying to escape. The roads were familiar, the turns ingrained in muscle memory, but the weight of what awaited him made everything feel foreign, distant, like stepping into a place that existed in another lifetime. He had thought about this moment countless times, imagined how it would play out, how he would feel, what he would say. Would there be anger? Would he stand in front of them, unleashing years of bottled-up rage, tearing them apart the way they had torn him apart? Would there be satisfaction, The cold pleasure of watching them realize that their regrets meant nothing, that their guilt wouldn't save them, or would there be nothing at all? Just an empty void where love and pain had once coexisted? The house appeared as he rounded the last turn, standing there just as it always had. It looked the same windows, the same walls, the same porch where he had once stood, hearing his mother tell him that he had ruined their lives. But Ryan wasn't the same. And this time, he was the one delivering the final blow. His parents had been waiting. He could tell from the way the curtains moved slightly, the way the porch light was already on, as if they had been anticipating his arrival. When he pulled into the driveway, the front door opened before he had even stepped out of the car. His mother emerged first, her face tight with emotion, a hesitation in her step as if she was afraid that if she moved too quickly, he would vanish. His father followed, shoulders squared, expression unreadable, though Ryan could see the strain behind it, the weight of everything that had led to this moment. They wanted this to be a reunion. He could see it in their faces, in the way his mother's eyes searched his, looking for something, for forgiveness, for warmth, for the son they had thrown away but now desperately wanted back. But Ryan hadn't come back to be part of their family again. He had come back to end it. He stepped inside for the first time in years, and everything about the house felt smaller. The walls that had once surrounded him with warmth now felt suffocating, the air thick with the ghosts of a past that no longer belonged to him. His mother started speaking immediately, words tumbling out in a frantic rush, apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to rewrite history. She talked about how much they had missed him, how they had been blinded, how they had been deceived by Emma's lies. She said they had never stopped loving him, that they had prayed for this moment. His father remained silent, watching, waiting, as if sensing that this wasn't going to end the way they had hoped. Ron let them talk. He let them believe, for just a moment, that this was something that could be salvaged, that they could fix what had been broken, that the years of abandonment and suffering could be wiped away with the right words. He let them believe that there was still a chance. Then, when the weight of their desperation filled the room, he finally shattered the illusion. He told them the truth. He wasn't staying. He wasn't here to rebuild what had been lost. He had come back to return the favor, because they had abandoned him, and now he was going to do the same. He had spent years carrying the burden of their choices, years suffering under the weight of a lie they had never once questioned. They had taken everything from him, his home, his future, his dignity, and they had never even hesitated. They had believed Emma without a second thought, cast him out without a single moment of doubt. They had let him rot while the real guilty party had continued living among them, protected, untouched. And the worst part? They had never even doubted Emma. Not once. That was what sealed it. They had never wanted to hear Ryan's side, because it had been easier to throw him away. It had been easier to sacrifice him than to face the uncomfortable truth. And now that the truth had clawed its way out of the grave they had buried it in, they thought they could bring him back. But Ryan wasn't lost anymore. They were. His mother broke down first, the realization hitting her like a physical force. His father remained stiff, his jaw clenched, but Ryan could see the cracks forming, the quiet, devastating understanding that he had made a mistake he could never undo. They had expected anger, maybe even hatred, but what they got was worse. They got nothing. No rad, no forgiveness, just cold, unwavering indifference. Because anger meant he still cared. Hatred meant they still had a place in his heart, even if it was a dark one. But indifference? Indifference meant they had ceased to exist. And that was their punishment. As he turned to leave, his mother pleaded, desperation thick in her voice. But he didn't stop. He walked out, just as they had once forced him to do. But this time, the difference was clear. This time it was his choice. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving a point. This was about freedom. For 7 years, he had been the one suffering, the one looking for answers, the one bearing the weight of a crime he hadn't committed. But now, that weight belonged to them. They were the ones who would have to live with what they had done. They were the ones who would wake up every day knowing they had abandoned their son. They were the ones who would never get another chance. And as Ryan walked away from the house for the final time, he felt nothing but peace. Because for the first time in years, He wasn't carrying the past with him. He had left it behind,